My dad chose his new family and left me behind. Years later I discovered the shocking truth and why my uncle was always there for me. Alright, so this is the story of how I ended up living with my uncle. To really understand why this is such a big deal, I have to take you back to when I was around 9 or 10 years old. My mom, who was basically my whole world, passed away. It was a car accident, and just like that, she was gone. No one sees that coming, right? When you're that young, it's like you don't even fully understand what's happening. One day she was here, and the next, everything changed. It didn't hit me all at once though. It came in waves, like random moments when I'd expect her to walk through the door, but she never did. My dad wasn't really in the picture, even when she was around. He had already started a new family by then, got remarried, and had kids with his new wife, so when my mom passed, there was no way I could live with him. I'm not even sure if he wanted me to live with him, to be honest. It wasn't like we had some great relationship. I wasn't angry about it back then, it just was what it was. So my uncle, my mom's older brother, stepped in. He took me in like it was no big deal. He didn't hesitate or make me feel like a burden, which, looking back, was huge. I mean, this guy had his own family, his own kid, my cousin James, and still made room for me. I didn't get it at the time, but now I see how much he really did for me. He basically became my dad overnight, even though no one actually said that out loud. My uncle's always been a pretty stand-up guy. He's the kind of person who handles his business quietly and doesn't talk about what he's done for people. But he made sure I had what I needed. I remember when I first moved in, it was kind of weird. I didn't really know what to do with myself. I mean, how do you even act in someone else's house? They weren't strangers, obviously, but it wasn't my home, you know? My room was already set up when I got there, which was nice. They didn't make me sleep on the couch or anything. It was like they were telling me, "You're part of the family now," even though it didn't feel that way right off the bat. James, my cousin, was about my age. We were in the same grade, actually. I think that helped a lot because we didn't have that weird older-younger cousin dynamic. He wasn't standoffish or anything either. If anything, he treated me like a brother right from the start, and that helped me settle in quicker than I expected. It was still hard though. Losing my mom just left this big hole, and even though my uncle and aunt tried to fill that space, it wasn't the same. But I never felt unwanted, which again, looking back, was pretty lucky. My aunt though, I'm not sure she felt the same way about me as my uncle did. She wasn't mean or anything like that, but there was this, I guess like, she was polite but not overly warm. It could have just been me, but I always got the feeling she wasn't as thrilled about me being there as my uncle was. Don't get me wrong, she never said anything outright or treated me badly. But it's like when you can just sense that someone's not 100% comfortable with you around. I guess I always felt like I had to stay on my best behavior, make sure I wasn't causing any problems. James and I shared a lot of the same stuff. Like, if my uncle got James something, he'd get the same thing for me. When James got a laptop for school, so did I. If James needed new shoes, I got the same pair. It wasn't some hand-me-down situation either. My uncle made sure I didn't feel like the extra kid, if that makes sense. I didn't even ask for these things, but it's like my uncle wanted me to have the same opportunities as James. Looking back, it's kind of wild how much he took on. Most people would have just done the bare minimum and called it a day, but not him. The real game changer though was when I turned 18. My uncle bought me a car for my birthday, a car. I hadn't even asked for one because honestly, who expects that? But he handed me the keys like it was no big deal, like I deserved it. James got one too, but that's the thing. I didn't feel like I was just getting what James got. It felt like he wanted me to have it for me, not just because he was obligated to do it. That moment really stuck with me. I mean, how do you even thank someone for something like that? Anyway, by the time I finished high school, I really started thinking of my uncle as my dad even though we never had that conversation. My dad was pretty much out of the picture, and my uncle had been there for me through everything. He paid for stuff, made sure I had a roof over my head, and kept me in line when I needed it. But more than that, he gave me a place to feel safe after my world had completely fallen apart. That's not something you can ever really repay, you know? But here's the thing. There was always this underlying feeling that I didn't completely belong, like I wasn't really part of the family. It wasn't anything anyone said directly, but it was more about the little things. Like my aunt never included me in certain conversations, or sometimes I'd notice I wasn't invited to family outings that my uncle and James would go on. It didn't hurt exactly, but it reminded me that I wasn't their actual son, just the kid they took in because they had to. Still, I never wanted for anything. My uncle made sure I had everything I needed, and James never made me feel like I was second place. We were more like brothers than cousins, and that's something I'm really thankful for. He could have easily been a jerk about the whole situation, but he wasn't. We'd hang out, play video games, do all the stuff you'd expect two teenage boys to do. It was normal, and after everything that had happened, normal was exactly what I needed. So yeah, That's how I ended up living with my uncle. It wasn't perfect, but it was a lot better than it could have been. I know plenty of people who don't have anyone step up for them when life goes sideways, so I'm lucky in that sense. I had my own room, my own stuff, and a family who took care of me when they didn't have to. And for that, I'll always be grateful. I just didn't know that things would get more complicated down the line. But I guess that's how life works, right? Just when you think you've got everything figured out, something comes along and throws you off. By the time I hit my early 20s, I was in a pretty decent spot. I had a steady job after finishing school, a car my uncle gave me when I turned 18, and a good relationship with my cousin James. Life wasn't perfect, but I felt like things were going all right. My uncle was still like a father to me, though we didn't always talk about stuff like feelings or whatever. I knew he had my back, and that was enough. In my culture, there's this big deal about owning a home when you're ready to get married. It's kind of expected that by the time you're looking to settle down, you've got a house sorted out. For some people, it's no problem because their parents help them buy a place. The idea is that you should have everything ready before you even propose to someone. Like, having your own home shows that you're serious and can take care of a family. If you don't, it can be a deal breaker for the woman's family. Now, with my mom gone and my dad not in the picture, I didn't have anyone to fall back on except my uncle. In a way, he became my default parent. He'd always made it clear that he was going to help me out, especially when it came to the big things, and I figured that would include buying a house when the time came. He'd already done it for James when he got married, so I just assumed he'd do the same for me. I mean, why wouldn't he? He treated me like one of his own. One day though, my uncle sat me down to talk about this. He said he was ready to help me buy a home when I was ready to get married, but there was a catch, a pretty big one actually. He wanted me to change my last name to his. Now, I don't know if this is common everywhere, but in my culture, your last name is a huge deal. It's tied to your identity, your family, and even your status in the community. So when he asked me to do this, it wasn't a small ask. At first, I didn't really know how to react. He said that since he'd raised me and I was more like a son to him than my actual dad, I should take his name. He also said it would honor my mom's memory since it was her family name too, and not my dad's. I get that, I really do. But changing my name felt big. Like people in the community would notice, and I didn't want to have to explain to everyone why I was suddenly going by a different last name. It would raise all sorts of questions that I wasn't ready to answer. I tried explaining that to him. I said that while I appreciated everything he'd done for me, I didn't think it was fair to make changing my name a condition for buying a house. I wasn't saying no right away, but I needed time to think about it. I mean, this wasn't something you just decide on overnight, right? It's a pretty big deal. My uncle, though, didn't see it that way. For him it was simple. If I wanted his help with the house, I'd need to take his last name. No name change, no house. I remember sitting there, feeling kind of stunned. I didn't expect this to turn into a sort of ultimatum. I thought he'd understand where I was coming from, but he was dead set on his condition. From that moment, things started feeling awkward between us. It wasn't like we were fighting or anything, but there was this unspoken tension that hadn't been there before. I could feel it every time we were in the same room. He wasn't being cold or rude, but it was like he was waiting for me to agree to his terms, and I wasn't ready to do that yet. I didn't know what to do, honestly. I didn't want to lose his support, but at the same time, I didn't feel right about changing my last name just to get something out of it. It felt like I was being forced into a corner. My aunt didn't say much about the whole thing, at least not to me. She just carried on like everything was normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was keeping her distance. I don't know if she agreed with my uncle or if she thought I was being difficult, but whatever it was, she wasn't really involved. Same with James. He didn't say anything either, but I knew he knew what was going on. I ended up talking to a few of my close friends about it. I thought they'd understand where I was coming from, but instead, most of them said I was being ungrateful. They told me I should just change my name and take the house, that I was making a big deal out of nothing. One of my buddies even said, "Dude, if someone's willing to give you a house, you take it. Who cares what your name is?" And yeah, maybe to them it didn't seem like a big deal, but to me, it was more than just a name. I was caught between wanting to respect my uncle's wishes and feeling like I was giving up a part of myself. Like I'd spent my whole life being known by this name, and now I was supposed to change it for a house? I know that sounds kind of dumb when I say it out loud, but it really bothered me. The worst part is that I don't think my uncle understood how hard this was for me. To him, it seemed like a simple decision, and the fact that I wasn't jumping at the offer probably made him think I was being ungrateful. And maybe I was, I don't know. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about the house. It felt like I was being asked to give up something more than just a name. I wasn't ready to make a decision right away, and that just made things even more awkward. Every time I saw my uncle, I could tell he was waiting for an answer. I knew I couldn't drag it out forever, but I wasn't ready to say yes or no yet. So, I did what I usually do when I'm stuck. I avoided the conversation as much as possible, but I knew that couldn't last forever. At some point, I'd have to make a choice, and whatever I decided would change things between us, for better or worse. I just didn't know which way it was going to go. After that conversation with my uncle about the whole name change thing, things didn't just magically get better. If anything, it got worse. Every time we were in the same room, I felt like he was waiting for me to bring it up, like the silence was louder than ever. It wasn't just that he wanted me to change my name. It was like everything between us had shifted, and it made everything feel so awkward at home. I tried to avoid it, just keep my head down, focus on work, and pretend like things were normal. But it's not like you can escape from your own house, right? My uncle and I used to talk more, and even though we weren't the type to have deep emotional talks, we still had a decent connection. Now, it was like he was distant, and I could feel it. One night he called me into his office. He was sitting at his desk, papers everywhere, like he'd been going over bills or something, but I could tell from the look on his face that this wasn't about work. He didn't beat around the bush, he just came right out and asked me if I'd thought more about his offer. It felt like this heavy weight just dropped in the room the moment he said it. "I've been thinking," I told him. Which was true. I had been thinking, but I didn't have an answer that was going to make things better. It's just a big deal, changing my name. It feels like I'm giving up a part of who I am. He didn't say anything right away, just kind of leaned back in his chair and looked at me, like he was sizing me up. Finally, he said, "It's not about giving something up. It's about acknowledging who you are and where you come from." I felt like he didn't get it, or maybe he did get it, and that's why this was so important to him. I told him again that I wasn't sure, that I needed more time to think about it, and that's when he hit me with, "Time isn't going to change anything. Either you understand what this means to me, or you don't." That was the moment I realized, this wasn't just some casual request from him. To my uncle, this was about respect, loyalty, and family. He wasn't just asking me to take his name because it sounded good. He really believed that by raising me, he'd earned the right to ask this of me, and in his eyes, I should want to do it. But for me, it felt like I was losing control over something that was still mine, my name, my identity, the last piece of my past that was untouched. I told him again that I wasn't ready to decide, but I could see the frustration in his face. He wasn't going to push me, but it was clear that this wasn't just going to go away. After that, things got colder between us. He wasn't rude or anything, but we didn't talk like we used to. He stopped asking me about work, stopped checking in on how I was doing. It felt like I was a guest in the house, not part of the family anymore. My aunt wasn't helping much either, she just avoided the whole thing. James didn't say anything either, and honestly, I'm not even sure if he knew what was going on. It's not like I wanted to bring him into it. This was between me and my uncle. I kept thinking about what my friends had said, that I was being ungrateful, that I should just do it and move on. But it wasn't that simple. I didn't want to feel like I was being bought off with a house, even though that's kind of what it felt like. I didn't want to give up my name just for the sake of keeping the peace. And then there was the whole community aspect. People would definitely notice if I suddenly started going by a different last name, and I'd have to explain it every time. It wasn't just about what my uncle thought, it was about how everyone else would see me too. A few weeks went by, and the tension was still there, hanging over everything. I'd wake up every morning with this pit in my stomach, knowing that this was going to come up again sooner or later. And then it did. One Saturday, my uncle called a family meeting. I'd never been in a family meeting before, so I knew right away that this wasn't going to be a casual chat. We all sat in the living room, me, my uncle, my aunt, and James. My uncle looked serious but not angry, just tired maybe. He started talking about how family is important, how names carry weight in our culture, and how he'd always seen me as his son. Even if it wasn't official. I knew where this was going. He wanted me to make my decision in front of everyone. "I need to know what your decision is," he said, looking directly at me. Everyone was staring at me, waiting for what I was going to say. My aunt, who had stayed pretty quiet this whole time, was suddenly really interested in what I was going to do. James didn't say anything, but he was watching too. I sat there for a minute, trying to find the right words. "I understand why this is important to you," I started, and I could see my uncle nodding, like he expected me to say yes right then. "But I'm just not ready to change my name." The room went dead quiet. I mean, you could have heard a pin drop. My uncle didn't say anything at first, just stared at me, like he was trying to process what I'd just said. My aunt finally broke the silence by standing up and leaving the room without a word. James followed her out, and it was just me and my uncle left sitting there. He sighed this deep, frustrated sigh and said, "You're making a mistake." I wanted to argue. to explain myself again. But what was the point? He wasn't going to change his mind, and I wasn't going to change mine, at least not right then. So, I just nodded and stood up to leave. As I walked out of the room, I felt this weird mix of relief and guilt. I'd stood up for myself, sure, but I'd also just made things even more complicated. I didn't know how we were going to move forward from this, but one thing was clear. Nothing was going to be the same after that conversation, and honestly, I wasn't sure if I was ready for that either. After that family meeting, things at home felt different. It's hard to explain, but you know when something's wrong, and nobody's saying it? Like you can feel it in the air, but everyone's pretending like everything's fine? That's how it was. My uncle didn't bring up the name change again, but I could tell he wasn't happy. The guy wasn't one to sulk or make passive-aggressive comments, he just went quiet, like he was letting the silence speak for him. I tried not to let it get to me, but it did. How could it not? Every time I walked into a room there was this tension, like he was disappointed in me, and it felt awful. My aunt, on the other hand, barely looked at me. She wasn't even trying to hide it. Before, we weren't super close or anything, but at least we were polite to each other. Now, she didn't even bother with the polite part. If I said good morning, she'd act like she didn't hear me, like I wasn't even in the room. James was the only one who seemed normal. He never brought up the whole situation, and I was thankful for that. We still hung out like we used to, played video games, grabbed food, joked around. But I knew he probably heard everything from my uncle and aunt. He wasn't dumb, he could feel the tension too. I think he just didn't want to get involved, which I respected. It was nice to have at least one person who didn't treat me any differently. The weeks went by, and the more time passed, the more isolated I started to feel. It's strange living in a house where you don't feel welcome anymore. It wasn't like I was going to get kicked out or anything. I knew my uncle wouldn't do that, but it started feeling less like home. I started spending more time out of the house, staying at work later, or hanging out with friends more often. I didn't want to be in the middle of that awkward atmosphere, even though I knew avoiding it wasn't going to fix anything. Eventually, I realized I couldn't keep dodging the issue forever. I didn't want things to stay this way, but I also didn't know how to make it right. The name thing was still hanging over everything, and I wasn't sure how to move past it without giving in. Every time I thought about it, I felt trapped, like no matter what I chose, someone was going to end up hurt. Then, one evening, I was in my room, scrolling through my phone, when there was a knock on my door. It was my uncle. That wasn't weird or anything, he'd knocked on my door plenty of times before, but this time, it felt different. He hadn't come to my room in a while, so when I opened the door and saw him standing there, I felt this knot in my stomach. He asked if we could talk, and I knew right away what it was about. We sat down in my room, and he didn't waste any time getting to the point. "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation," he started, "about the name." I braced myself, expecting him to push the issue again, but instead, he surprised me. "I don't want this to keep hanging over us," he said. "I've been hard on you, and maybe I haven't been as fair as I should have been." I didn't know what to say. It wasn't like I expected him to apologize, but it felt like that's what he was doing, in his own way. He wasn't saying I'm sorry, but he was acknowledging that things hadn't been right between us, and that was enough for me. "I'm not trying to force you into something you don't want to do," he continued. "But I need you to understand why this is so important to me. I've always seen you as my son, and in our culture that means something. It's not just about the name, it's about family, about making things official." I could feel how serious he was, and I understood where he was coming from, but that didn't make it any easier. "I get it," I told him, and I meant it, but it's hard for me. My name, it's all I have left from my past, from before everything changed. I don't want to lose that." He nodded, like he was really listening to me, and for the first time in weeks it felt like we were actually talking to each other again, not just at each other. "I'm not asking you to give up your past," he said. "I'm asking you to build on it. This isn't about erasing who you are, it's about adding to it." I sat there for a while, thinking about what he'd said. I still didn't know if I could do it, but at least now I felt like he understood why I was struggling with the decision. He wasn't just demanding something from me anymore, he was explaining it, trying to meet me halfway. "I don't want this to come between us," he added, after a long pause. "But at the same time, I need you to know how much this means to me." I didn't have an answer for him right then. I told him I needed more time to think about it, and he didn't push me. He just nodded and said he understood, then left me alone to figure things out. After he left, I felt a little better, like maybe there was a way to make this work without anyone getting hurt. But I also knew that I still wasn't ready to give him an answer. Changing my name, even for someone who had done so much for me, still felt like too much. I wasn't ready to give that up, not yet. but at least now, I didn't feel like I was completely alone in this. My uncle had opened the door for a real conversation, and that was more than I'd expected. I still didn't know what I was going to do, but at least now it felt like we were both on the same page, or at least close to it. The next few days were lighter, I guess. The tension wasn't totally gone, but it wasn't as heavy as before. My aunt was still kind of distant, but I noticed she wasn't as cold. Maybe my uncle had talked to her. Or maybe she was just giving me space to figure things out. James, still being James, didn't say anything about it, but he was around more. We hung out like we used to, and it felt good to have that normalcy back. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. I still had a big decision ahead of me, and I knew that whatever I decided would change things one way or another. But for the first time in a while, I felt like maybe I wasn't as stuck as I thought. Maybe there was a way forward that didn't mean losing everything or hurting the people I cared about. I just had to figure out what that looked like. Update? A few weeks passed after that conversation with my uncle, and things were definitely better, but I could still feel the weight of the decision hanging over me. It wasn't as tense as before, but the name change thing was still there, just in the background. I'd be at work, trying to focus, and out of nowhere, I'd start thinking about it again. It was like, no matter how much time passed, it just wouldn't go away. I knew I had to make a decision sooner or later. My uncle hadn't brought it up again, but I could tell he was waiting. He'd given me the space I needed, but eventually, he was going to need an answer, and I couldn't keep avoiding it forever. One Saturday morning, I decided to go for a drive. It wasn't something I did often, but sometimes I just needed to get out of the house and clear my head. I ended up driving for a couple of hours, not really going anywhere in particular, just thinking. I kept going over the same things in my mind, what it would mean to change my name, what it would mean if I didn't. Both options felt heavy, like there was no easy way out. After a while, I pulled over at this little park I used to go to when I was younger. It was quiet, with a few benches scattered around, and not many people were there. I sat down on one of the benches, and just let my mind wander for a bit, trying to figure out what I really wanted. Did I want to change my name for my uncle? Or was I holding on to my current name because it was the last thing I had from my old life, from my mom? It was tough. I loved my uncle, and I knew how much he'd done for me. He'd been more of a dad to me than my actual dad ever was. But the name thing, it felt like such a personal choice, and I didn't want to feel like I was being pressured into it, even if it wasn't intentional. Sitting there in the park, I thought about my mom. I wondered what she would have wanted. Would she have wanted me to take my uncle's name? Would she have cared? Or would she have wanted me to keep my own? I didn't know the answer, and it frustrated me that I'd never know. I missed her in that moment, more than I had in a long time. I wanted her to tell me what to do to help me make the right choice. I must have sat there for an hour or so just thinking, before I finally got up and drove back home. I didn't have an answer yet, but I felt like I was getting closer. I couldn't keep going back and forth forever. At some point, I had to pick a side, even if it wasn't perfect. That evening, when I got home, my uncle was in the living room watching TV. It was the first time in a while that I felt like maybe I could talk to him without things feeling awkward. I wasn't sure I was ready to give him an answer, but I knew I couldn't keep avoiding it forever. I sat down next to him on the couch, and for a minute we just watched TV in silence. I don't even remember what was on, it didn't really matter. After a while, I turned to him and said, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said." He turned off the TV and looked at me, giving me his full attention, like he knew this was the moment we'd both been waiting for. "I know how important the name is to you," I said, "and I understand why you want me to change it. You've done so much for me, and I'm grateful for everything. I wouldn't be where I am without you." He nodded but didn't say anything, just waiting for me to finish. "But I'm still not sure I'm ready to change my name," I continued. "It's not that I don't appreciate everything you've done for me, it's just, it feels like a big part of who I am. It's one of the last things I have from my past, from before everything changed." I could see him thinking about what I was saying, and for the first time I felt like he really got it. He wasn't just pushing his own feelings, he was trying to understand mine. "I'm not saying no," I added quickly, "but I need more time. I don't want to rush this decision, and I don't want to make a choice that I'll regret later." He leaned back in his chair, letting out a long breath, like he was processing everything I just said. Then he looked at me and said, "I get it, I really do. And I don't want to force you into anything you're not ready for. I want you to know how much this means to me." There was a long pause after that, but it wasn't the awkward kind of silence we'd been having before. It was more like we were both finally on the same page, even if we didn't have all the answers yet. "I appreciate that," I said, "and I want you to know that this isn't about me not wanting to be a part of this family. You've been like a father to me, and that's never going to change, no matter what my name is." That seemed to really hit him, and I could tell that he understood what I was trying to say. I'm proud of you, he said after a while, no matter what name you decide to go by. Hearing that from him, after everything, meant more than I could put into words. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, even though the decision was still out there, waiting for me. Thanks, I said, not really sure what else to say. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was enough for now. We sat there for a while longer, not really talking, but just being in the same room without the tension that had been hanging over us for weeks. It wasn't perfect, and I knew the decision was still going to come eventually, but at least now, I didn't feel like I was carrying the weight of it alone. My uncle understood, and for now, that was enough. I didn't know when I'd make my final choice, but I knew that when the time came, whatever I decided, it would be for the right reasons. Not out of guilt or pressure, but because I'd thought it through and made the choice that was best for me. And that felt like a step in the right direction. What date? 2. After that talk with my uncle, things didn't exactly go back to normal, but they felt a lot less tense. We didn't really bring up the name change again, and I think we both kind of agreed to give it some space. It wasn't like the issue was gone, but the pressure wasn't as heavy anymore. He knew where I was coming from, and I understood how much it meant to him. That made it easier to be around each other again. The house felt a little more relaxed too. My aunt wasn't as cold, and even though she still kept her distance, she wasn't outright ignoring me anymore. I'd catch her giving me a small nod when we passed each other in the hallway or the kitchen. And honestly, I'll take that over complete silence. It was a start. James and I stayed close, like we always had. He still didn't bring up the whole situation, and I appreciated that more than he probably knew. He could have easily taken sides or made it weird, but he didn't. We just kept doing our usual thing, playing games, hanging out. It was nice to have something that stayed the same while everything else felt like it was shifting. But even though things were calmer at home, I couldn't stop thinking about the decision. Every time I thought I was ready to make up my mind, I'd second-guess myself. On the one hand, taking my uncle's last name felt like a big step in solidifying everything he'd done for me, like I was acknowledging all the ways he'd been there when no one else had. On the other hand, it still felt like giving up a piece of who I was. I wasn't sure if I could let go of that, no matter how much I loved my uncle. I kept going back to the park on weekends, just to think. Something about being away from the house, away from the pressure of it all, helped clear my head. I'd sit on the same bench for hours, watching people go by, just letting my mind wander. Sometimes, I'd wonder if I was making this a bigger deal than it needed to be, like maybe it was just a name, and I was holding on to something that didn't matter as much as I thought it did. But every time I got close to convincing myself of that, I'd feel this little tug, like deep down, I knew that it did matter. It wasn't just about a name, it was about my past, my mom, and everything that had happened before I moved in with my uncle. Changing my name felt like closing a door on that part of my life, and I wasn't sure I was ready for that yet. I didn't have a deadline, at least not one my uncle had given me, but I knew I couldn't leave it hanging forever. I needed to make a decision, for both of us.